Dobry Tiborowski. Long time no view. As you might be aware, the U.S. Supreme Court is considering a follow-up to its notorious Citizens United castration of the democratic process. An Alabama billionaire is bringing suit to remove the cap on individual campaign contributions, allowing the rich fuckers of your mother and mine who own this country to directly buy and sell the people who run for office. That this suit originated in a former slave state that once seceded because it couldn't own Congress along with its other human chattels should come as no surprise. What I am going to surprise you with is that the United States government is less democratic, less inclusive of its citizens than Marxist-Leninist Cuba under its leader Maximo for life Fidel Castro, and I can prove it. As viewers of this channel know, I've used Cuba as an example before. Cuban images grace my channel page after all, and I do so not to promote dogmatic Marxism, so much as to again show how revolutionary Cuba has consistently shown up the great Oz of the North, pulling back the curtain to reveal the petty little people behind it, manipulating the bells and whistles. If you go to Cuba, pick a vendor or street sweeper of any color or gender and try telling him he is too poor or ignorant to vote in a Cuban election, or doesn't have the right connections to participate in his local government, that his vote means nothing because his candidate owes his nomination to a rich funder investing in him like a stock portfolio. In the old Cuba, that was the case. Cuban electoral democracy was so important that whole classes of people had to be excluded from it. It was too important for them. And even when they weren't, Cuban parliamentary democracy was so gamed by the wealthy that it was meaningless to the average Cuban citizen who was excluded from it, as effectively as he was excluded from the downtown beaches and hotels. This was the electrical system, as well as the electrical system, imported from the United States under the old satellite regime up to 1959. Now in Cuba, everyone is included in local neighborhood committees of the defense of the revolution, in the unions that work, in broad civic organizations for women and youth. No one is excluded unless he or she consciously insists on separating themselves from the country's political network. Just as the old Cuba prided itself on its free press and allowed half the population to remain sunken in functional literacy, so American democracy in Cuba effectively excluded half the population. But now universal civic participation, as with education, health care, and literacy, is the law of the land. No one is turned away from speaking or voting in a public body because he's too unimportant to matter. Okay. I can hear the protest screaming through the screen. Azov, you friggin' moron. Cuba is run by a self-appointed Leninist vanguard party, and Cubans have to vote for whoever the Communist Party tells them to vote for, who in turn are controlled by one man like some feudal monarchy. The committees for the defense of the revolution are meant to regulate and monitor the population in conjunction with the police, not give voice to the true public opinion. And the same with the trade unions, official women's and youth organizations, and others like them. And there's no right of opposition. Anyone who even thinks of writing a critical letter to the editor or organizing an Occupy movement in Havana Central Park is loaded in a police van and disappeared from public sight for a long time. So how the hell can you compare a rigged game like that to the free institutions of the United States? I can do so for two important reasons, which you can't deny. One, the game in the U.S. is rigged by party machines, which in turn are shells for wealthy contributors, much like law firms represent only those who buy their services by the hour or on retainer. Thus, the majority is effectively excluded from effective participation. Private power effectively controls the selection of candidates just as effectively as an overbearing party machine. Thus, the tricks registrars in southern states used to pull were really secondary and unnecessary for true disfranchisement, like poll taxes, grandfather clauses, literacy tests, and the like. Segregation from power is the norm in American democracy. This is political freedom of a certain kind, if you want to call it that. If you're a libertarian opposed to state coercion, to forced integration, this is your freedom to opt out. It has nothing to do with excluding others from participating, but that's how libertarian rhetoric is employed in practice in the U.S. And how worthwhile is the right to protest in reality? How much real impact did the Occupy movement have? Its participants were driven from the streets by police, even if its participants remained at liberty to voice their protests elsewhere. It did not affect change or a redistribution of political power, nor could it do so without breaking the private control over the public organizations of state through freely elected representatives. The second reason is that the broad civic organizations in Cuba, like the CDR and those devoted to specific constituencies like women, labor, and youth, are an embryo far more democratic than at-large candidates fronted by parties. no matter how many of them field competing contenders. In the end, in the U.S., one has a vanguard that, as currently seen in the U.S. Congress, is even less representative of the average American than the Communist Party to the average Cubano. Such mass organizations as in Cuba are the real spokespeople of its civil society, and should Cuba evolve in more representative directions, it can only be through the direct empowerment of these organizations themselves in state administration, not the reintroduction of U.S.-style democracy, which, as we see, differs only in form, not substance, from the feudal patronage of which Cuba is currently accused. Oh, the two blind Canucks again. He was reaching out through the cyber ether today. Hello? Why, it's Thomas Jefferson, founding father of the American Republic, writer of the Declaration of Independence, admirer of revolutionary France, architect of our Bill of Rights, and aristocratic slave owner. Anyone besides me connecting the dots? What's that? You want to remind our viewers of your statement that the tree of liberty needs to be freshly watered in blood every few years? So you were a terrorist too, huh? Oh, a patriot who valued civic freedom and social justice? Well, you sound like Che Guevara. Let there be 2, 3, many Bunker Hills, huh? Well, maybe you're onto something. The tree of liberty looks pretty anemic there in Washington, and whatever miracle grow they're using sure ain't working. Maybe it does need some fresh blood at the roots.